Okay, Alex, you had a question.
Yeah. So, how have you guys embraced discomfort and found success in hardship, just in general through your younger years?
Do you guys have any discomfort? I haven't had any.
Yeah. We can look at you and tell you've had
I've
this.
You lived like 5 years of bad highway. I will start by letting you know my dad ended up being out of work for 12 years solid. From my junior high, middle school years through college. So I had to go to work these full time as a sophomore in high school,
Wow.
100 hours a week in the summer just to try to keep the family going. And mom and dad divorced during that time. My sister was schizophrenic, so she was in and out of the state mental hospital. So my early years were some of my rougher years. And I didn't like it, but, over the course of time, like we talked earlier about like trying to fast track your development. That probably more than anything in my life, actually, it developed me to that's where I learned a trade. So I took on a house painting trade early on. But the idea of I'm going to have to go ahead and lead my own life and try to provide for my sister and moms at the time was brutal. But literally, like looking back at it, I wish my mom and dad had not got divorced and all that stuff. But I go, man, it was so good for me. It's where I actually dove really deep with God. I actually quit my youth group because my youth group, all they wanted to do was like play games and talk about dumb stuff. And I was like, hey, I'm over here.
Forget bingo.
And even my youth pastor, like I'd tell him what was going on. He'd be like, kind of sounds rough. So I just had to learn how to, kind of really lock in with God on my own and work hard. But man, looking back, it just really was fan. So I would tell young guys, when you're going through discomfort, this is like the greatest gift you're going to have. Like the suffering, I always say, is like the secret sauce. That's development. And you don't really grow in anything in life unless you're under duress.
That's right.
So, I have struggled at times when you would read little Bible verses about counting all joy whenever
Trials, tribulations.
but as you get older, you do look back and you go, I'm glad I got these scars. Like I'm glad I got to take some years full of heat. And so I would first say, don't try to get out of the discomfort. Realize what it's doing in you. I don't know how else you would, like outside of suffering and difficulty, I don't know how else you would ever grow.
No, I think you have to view it like, most likely all of us had played some kind of sports or whatever in the past. And you think, especially when you're in organized sports, like let's say football, for instance, and you go through two-a-days. And especially, I hate to
Give us
sound
a lot
like
about that.
back in the day, you got to where they gave us salt hills. They were crazy. It was just insane. Like, water will make you weak. It's like, no, that will kill you. It was ridiculous. But, all that pain and suffering in the training is what prepared you to really make the game easier. And in your head, so you didn't even have to think about it. You just moved. And I don't think that we always look at life like that when we should. That a lot of life is training for something in front of us. And especially when you're young, it's like, okay, the pain of this training. But I knew guys that hated practice. I loved it. I loved every day of football practice. Almost as much as I
You're a
loved it.
fanatic about the Cowboys.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that ended. I spent that 30 years ago. But for anything in your life, I think that if we would look at it, and Paul equated it that way. It's training. I buff up my body, so that I won't be a castaway in the moment. So I think that we look at our younger years, a lot of it, but you still can enjoy the moment of training and even the hardships in it. If you look for that contentment that Paul talked about, in the moment. Doesn't mean that you're satisfied, but we are called to be content in the moment. in him. Yeah, satisfied in a relationship.
I had it really different. I hated the discomfort. I was full of emotion. You know what I mean? I had raised my grandmother, my mother, and two sisters. You know, had some fatherly figures come in and out of the house, but the only emotion that they knew was anger, right? And so I hated discomfort. I hated it so much where it was actually the force behind me wanting to change things. It was like, oh, I hate this so bad. Kind of like you, I had to work early on, you know, went to school all day. And then in the 5th grade, I started working evenings and into about 1 or 2.
You started 5th grade.
Yeah, right about 5th grade when I was taught, when I actually had a little bit something to work with, because before that I couldn't do anything physically, right? Because I just didn't have stature for that. But 5th grade, and so I'd go to school, walk home, get there. Then my stepfather, he owned a drywall company, and worked for a drywall company and subcontracted to him. And I'd go and we'd work in drywall overnight into about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And they would drink and have fun while they were, and I would be throwing trash away. And we'd get home. I'd drive home and then wake up, go to school the next day, and then work Saturday and Sundays, 12-hour days, and never got paid for it, you know, and I hated it. I hated it. I was thinking, oh my God, I can't wait to run away. Just open the door long enough. I'm out of here. And so I did. I left my home at 15 years old. But back to what it did for me, it was actually what ignited me to say, I'd rather live on the streets than be here any longer, because I'm sick and tired of this discomfort, you know? All the pressures when I was a kid were a little different. There were drugs and gangs and poverty and those sorts of things. And so I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I'd rather take my chances out in the world than sit in that
But it was a
environment.
motivator that
It was a
propelled you,
motivator,
right?
yeah. And so when it goes to hardships, how did that help me bring success in hardships? I never stopped working. I never stopped grinding. Even to today, I can still be caught up in the guiltiness of the desire to continue to work because I have so much fun. And plus, I was just groomed to be like a railroad. Just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. But now when I talk to friends that are younger than I am, I always embrace the emotion of how they're feeling. I always embrace the sadness or the hurt or whatever's going on, the anger, you know what I mean? I embrace that. I was like, do it. Let's cry. Because what I've learned is so many times when we get next to a person who has an emotion, those emotions are really strong. And those emotions, when you can embrace them and actually feel them and let them go, it's a lot more healthier than feeling them, crying it all out and letting them go, than feeling them and holding on to them and letting them dwell. And all of a sudden, you're like the Tasmanian devil. You know what I mean? That might be before y'all's time. When I was a kid, he was my favorite cartoon character. But then all of a sudden, you're like this Tasmanian devil, and you're just full of this emotion. And you don't know if it's sadness or anger, or you don't know what it is, but feel it, feel every bit of it. And then once you're done with it, let it go. And then once you let it go, back to the grind. So
Most importantly, anything is better than drywall.
for sure, except maybe paint.
I was going to say that. Well, I started work when I was in kindergarten.
Oh yeah, I can tell. Yeah.
I worked a lot earlier than you guys.
When I was in my mom's
I was. That's right. Yeah, digging diamonds out of the dirt. But I think that what also is helpful with suffering, suffering's like a muscle, and the more you can not find ways to put yourself in suffering, because that's just stupid. We're not to look for suffering, but suffering it stretches this muscle in you, right? It creates all the stuff that Jacob's been through in his life. Has created a thick skin, and an ability to endure, right? So that whole phrase of endurance and steadfastness is a product of suffering, and so I know for us and for me, all the hardships I went through as a kid, most of them were brought on by myself, but those hardships and the suffering I went through to get out of those hardships made me the person that I am today. But what somebody told me, which was profound and really helped me, and it wasn't actually all that long ago, maybe about 10 years ago. When you're in the suffering, when you're in the suffering fest, you feel like it's never going to end. You feel like the world is crashing all around you, that the problems are beyond your ability to handle. And that's when people get desperate and they do stupid things. But what I've always realized is, if you know the story of Nehemiah in the Bible, so Nehemiah is rebuilding the city. He's coming back to Israel after the nation of Israel has been sent into captivity. And the Lord gives him a clear command. I want you to rebuild the city, rebuild the walls. And so he starts doing this, and he comes under persecution and attack. And he's building with one hand and holding the sword in his other hand, right? But every time Nehemiah would get off the wall, he'd get distracted, right? And so this phrase became a part of my life, is stay on the wall. You know, when we're going through suffering, stay on the wall. Just see it for what it is. Don't let it distract you. Don't let it hold you back. It's part of what you're going through right now, but stay on the wall. Keep doing what God wants you to do, and it will pass, because suffering ends. Just in time for the next one to start, generally speaking. But yeah, that's, I mean, for me, it's just suffering will come and it will pass. It doesn't last forever.
We have a saying in our community, because we have a bunch of folks that all moved into a pretty impoverished area of a city. And so most of our days we're working with things that don't work. And we have like an internal document statement. We just always go, hey, keep a sense of humor. So for me, like when you're in suffering, and that's why like comedians, oftentimes you hear the story of a comedian, they generally had a really rough go. And so their coping mechanism is to make light of that. And it isn't like in our community, we'll say we're a community of suffering and levity. So we will watch each other go through different things, and we'll always go, just keep a sense of humor. And it does help to just remember that. Like there's other things going on. A couple of years ago, my youngest daughter almost died unexpectedly. She was 27. And so I actually had to say goodbye to her in an ambulance. And I had gotten COVID the next day. So while she was fighting for her life, I actually was stuck on my farm.
Wow.
And Lance knew about this. And as you can imagine, I was losing my mind because we had just lost our son. So we were looking at losing 2 within a couple of years. And I don't really remember how I got out there, but I just had to walk. I couldn't just stay. And I felt like I was actually having a physical, like emotional breakdown, which I had never, all those years, you know, young guy trying to like take care of my family. I never had any like even close to like a breakdown. My son Ryan had severe epilepsy, so it was, you know, every night was like a battle getting him through a night. But I never even got close to a breakdown. But my daughter almost dying, it was like shutdown mode, and I actually walked up near my barn and I actually pooped my pants. Hadn't done that since like kindergarten.
Wow.
And I was just kind of standing there, you know, and I get a phone call. And so I answered the phone, and it's one of the guys in my community. And he goes, hey, how you doing? Because he knew what was going, you know, the whole community knew what was going on. And he goes, how you doing? I said, I don't think well. And he goes, well, what are you doing right now? And I said, I'm pooping myself. And he didn't say anything, no Bible verses, just like silence. And then he cracked a fantastic joke. And it literally woke me up. I remember I came out of it.
Like smelling salts.
And he said, hey, go ahead. Is your wife and Cheryl at the house? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, don't go inside. You're going to be real stinky. So he said, you know, just go out to your hose by the front of your deck there. And he kind of walked me back into, you know, so we talk about that. But oftentimes, you know, if you're in a suffering moment and you're by yourself, you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd say even as a young person, I would community up, find some people that don't just try to make you feel better, but they can crack appropriate jokes with great timing and sensitivity.
Yeah.
You'll get through, you know.
That's a good thing. I think relationships are key, because we live in a superficial world where you share your suffering. Some people will be, you know, that whole, oh, bless your heart, it's so terrible, but they don't really care. And so to find the people, and there's not going to be many of them, but the handful of people that you can have around you that can be in the trenches with you and not try to convince you that you're not in the trenches, but just be there with you.
Yeah.
And that's priceless. Yeah. How do you get through suffering? It's with people. You know, because that's it. You need friends around you that are going to speak life and speak sometimes hard truths.
Yeah.
You know, where you're like, you need to be, whether it's through joking and ripping you out of the situation, or actually just saying, hey, like, it's okay, we're done now feeling sorry for ourselves. It's get going. That's what he always does to me all the time. Yeah, he doesn't never let me suffer. That's it.
Pivot a little bit, though, on the same thing. Not just suffering, but what about like actual failures where you might make decisions that don't work, or you try things that don't work? Because that's that's a little bit, you know, a sick friend or a sick daughter. that you don't have any control over. But what happens when you've made decisions and then all of a sudden
You've contributed to yourself.
I think that's maybe even a little bit different. You guys got any thoughts just on how to handle like early failures?
They don't last very long, that's for sure. Time has a way of getting past just about anything. You know, I had my first daughter at the age of 17, and at that point, I thought this was the biggest trouble I could ever be in. You know, I didn't have any sense of values. I didn't have no idea on how to raise a child. I was a menace. And at that point, like, oh man, I really screwed up, right? Well, that's not the greatest way to think about a new person coming into the world, but that was how I thought about it. I was like, what do I do now, right? So when you, in that moment, I felt like I made a mistake, right? But that's only because I had the wrong gauge of what was good and what was bad, right? Now, time, just give it things just a little time. And it can be as small as the very next day. So sometimes we'll go through these decisions that we make mistakes, and then they'll linger for months, days, or years. I've learned how to leave those in a 24-hour scenario. Hey, this decision was made today. I'm not gonna let it take anything from tomorrow. You know, joy always comes in the morning. And so if when I screw up today, sometimes I'll intentionally stay up till midnight and I'll lock that sucker up and say, it's not going any further. And 1 a.m. I'm back to normal. And so I really, really do those things because I'm not carrying that over into the next day now. But then when I was a young man, you know, this just happened. Man, I let the decision of making a mistake linger for months, years sometimes. And then I made decisions that actually snowballed that mistake because I wasn't able to just say, okay, screwed up yesterday. I got a fresh slate today. What am I going to do? And I relate that back to what you said earlier. How do you find success? I wish I can redefine success every single day. You know what I mean? Like today's success is just not crying. Today's success is just not telling my daughter to pick up her shoes in the living room. Just let those suckers be for today. So redefining what my successes are at a daily and what they make me feel, because we all know what we think and what we want, but how do those things make me feel? Those decisions that we make, those mistakes. I really love the thought process of what does today look like? What does success today look like? What can I do about that right now? And then lock it up.
That's so good.
We actually talk about successes are actually failures. So in our network, we're like an entrepreneurial network. So we've basically set up kind of our own scales of success. But when you keep trying things and you fail, that's like we go, because at least you're trying. Most people actually go their whole lives, they never try anything.
Yeah.
So when you've made a decision, you've at least done something most people will never do.
True. Yeah.
Taken some risk. I think about, there's a passage in Hebrews that talks about these certain types of people that lived on the earth right when Jesus was doing this thing. Later, they're called the great cloud of witnesses. Like there are these humans that someday maybe we see or we meet. I always pictured like a great hall where these great people hang out and we get to go like hear their stories, but it says to live in view of them. But if you were to go back and talk to those people at the time that they were going through what they're doing, none of them got a win. It wasn't even a win. So they says they did not get to see anything that they were shooting for. They all got basically taken out, you know, ripped into. And so I think about getting into a heavenly realm where you're now actually sitting around with real people talking about the story of your life. And you will not want to go into the great cloud, you know, and tout your accomplishments. Because they will roll their eyes at you. But you will want to go, hey, see this scar right here? I got that this 1 year when I was trying to do this thing. I thought it would be something that God would like, and it was a disaster. And then those great cloud of witnesses will probably go, cool. I love that story. And I think that's the point of like living in a way that God would go, look, you didn't always succeed, but like you were super fun to watch because you were a gamer. And I think that's really to me, the measure of success is how many things you try I feel like, like even right now, people will look at what we're doing now and go, oh, that's a success. But I know there's 20 failures. We got a couple businesses that are working, but I got some that failed.
Yeah.
So I just go, but I'm proud of that. I'm proud of those failures.
That's a very good point, because there isn't a successful business on the planet that hasn't failed in some way, shape, or form, and there isn't a successful person that hasn't failed. And so failure is a natural part of life. And I think that based on what you guys are saying as well, I think the key is ownership, right? So what the enemy wants to do is always convince us that we are a product of our failures. Like we are the sum total of our failures. And generally, as human beings, we value ourselves that way. We look at all the things we've messed up and we say, that's who I am. That's not how the King, how Jesus sees us. He doesn't see us as a sum total of all of our failures. He sees us as a sum total of the greatest success ever, which is the cross. It's the gospel. And then so when we define ourselves by our failures control us, and we will be too scared to make decisions in the future that are going to stretch us. But when we honestly, with all conviction, say, I'm owning this decision, I feel this is the right thing, as a family, we're going to do this. Come what may, I know that the Lord will always be there on the other side. Wow. And sometimes it is the failure, and it's not the enemy that brought the failure. Sometimes it's part of the process. Sometimes the failure is
And that's what I was thinking. A lot of things that we call failure is just literally part of the process. Over the last few years, like we've seen, SpaceX, and we've seen SpaceX shoot these rockets up, and everybody's watching them, and then the rocket blows up, and everybody's like, "Oh, man, they messed up." And you see the SpaceX team going,
applauding.
I mean, it was exactly what they were needing to do. They needed to get that failure
To build
it.
Yeah.
And I think that life is a lot like that. There's a lot of things that we go, "Oh man, I crashed and burned, I failed," and it's like the Lord's like, "Well, no, it literally is part of the process."
Yeah, that's good.
And it's not just to make you feel good, or to patronize you in the moment. It really is the truth. And we've all heard about Edison, the 10,000 failures, and the filaments that he tried. And he's like, "No, this is all, I was winning all the way."
That's good.
Wow. But I do think, one of the things I think about, especially for young men that are married and are raising children, and even the different ages of the eras of their children's ages as they're growing up. When your children are toddlers versus when they're mid-teens or they're older teens, the decisions that you make or that you and your wife make have great implications on those kids. And we experienced this with our kids. Our kids were all three were born pretty close together. I mean, there's like 13 months separating each one of them between the next one that was born. So, I mean, like every year there's 2 weeks in time where their ages are 33, 34, and 35. I mean, that's how close they were formed. So they were all pretty close in age, and the era of the things that the decisions we made affected them pretty much the same. So, like, we decided to buy this land, and it was always kind of my wife and I, it was a dream to have a little hobby farm and outside St. Louis. So we bought this land and started paying it down, and after about 5 or 6 years, we decided we wanted to build. Well, the dream was, when we bought the land, they were young. They were all pre-teens. And we thought, oh, it's going to be great. Our kids are going to get to grow up on a farm and animals, and they're going to love it. Well, that's what we wanted when we were young. So we were projecting that upon them. Well, by the time we started building the house, now they're starting to get into their teens. We'll throw a pool in. Oh, they'll love it. Their friends will come over and everything. No, we are 35 minutes outside of civilization facing Earth.
No friends.
Their friends are there, and they're certainly not coming. And so by the time we get the house built and we get everything, our kids are well into their teens. They're driving. They're not wanting to go and play with pigs and sheep and ducks and rabbits. This is not Little House on the Prairie. And so now we're stuck with this situation. Our kids are frustrated because we've cut them off, from any ability to have friendships. That was, 25 years ago. And on my 60th birthday, I gathered all the kids around. And man, I mean, in tears, I asked them to forgive us.
Wow.
And everybody was crying. Now, and our family is a very open. I mean, we talk about stuff, we process, but that whole situation we had never talked about.
Wow.
And it came out of it. And it was they were very thankful and grateful. But I was just like, please forgive us. We think that was a mistake. And it hurt you in ways that we didn't think about. And at your age, I mean, when your kids are 3, 4, 5, I'm not going to sit down there and go, hey, babe, should I buy this model Tesla, or should I, get the new Ram, 2500? But the choices you make and decisions you make when your kids are older, they should be part of the equation, I think, because it affects them differently.
Yeah, that's good.
Which, I was just thinking, based on what you said, I have a question for the younger guys. And that is, as a father, I'm scared for the day when my son tells me all the mistakes I made and all the things that I did and the ways I led them that were perhaps weird, right? But I know from personal experience growing up with a dad who was super motivated, owned restaurants, but I saw multiple of his restaurants fail, not as a product of his bad doing, just the economy. But seeing him work through those failures really inspired me to never give up. And so my question to you is, what is it that the older generation and maybe your parents or people that you know that you respect, how have you seen them deal with suffering that's really inspired you? Like, is there something that you can look back on and think, wow, that actually was a motivator for me to keep going?
I think one of the
I'm sorry to interrupt. Am I on the young side or the older guy side? Hold on.
You're the old guy.
Sorry.
I think one of the biggest examples for me is my dad. My dad, he graduated and got a degree in computer science and just found no jobs out of high school or out of college in that. And had me to take care of and his new wife, my stepmom, and he just had to work real low-end jobs for a long time and worked at Starbucks for like 9 years. And just really watching the struggle we went through as a family, like having him work those low-end jobs and him doing overtime to make the bills and even buy me gifts on my birthday. Just having to constantly make those decisions and just looking how God took care of us along the way and really even just blessed my dad with community and people around him that offered him, here, stay at this house. Like, we'll sell it to you for cheaper, rent it out for you. And him not only walking into those gifts and blessings, but taking advantage of it and saying, okay, like we had a year where like he was just like, all right, I got to make a change. We got to switch something up. And he ended up doing coding school and computer school as well. And I just watched him go to work all day, come home, do school till like 1, 2 in the morning, and was doing that like every single day.
Wow.
And finally, it was a few years, and we ended up living in a camper at some point when we moved to California. And he just grinded it out, and he found success out of that. And it was just like watching him grow into this lion of a man, of like embracing the blessing, taking what God gave him, and just running with it. And so I remember I had kind of like a thing like that happen where I moved back from ministry school, and it was like my opportunity. I was living in my grandparents' guest house. I had no bills to pay, and it was like, okay, let's do school. And I did school for like a year, and then I failed. It was like I couldn't pass the test, and it really discouraged me for years. And so, but out of watching my dad, I'm finally back in a place where God has given me opportunity again. I'm like, okay, let me run with this as best I can. Let me run with this stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
For me, my brother is kind of my inspiration.
Yeah.
For things like that. So when I was a kid,
Yeah.
he was still a little bit older. He started making music and music things. This was 5 or 6 years ago, I would say. And then I'm basically kind of watching him grow through the music, and because music is so linear, you have to have consumers obviously for it to actually like even output anything.
Yeah.
And so there was time after time after time again that me and him would fail in doing that.
Yeah.
But seeing him still have the drive so much to where his entire lifestyle, he was like, you know what, this is what I'm gonna do, no matter how much I'm gonna fail. Failure just was not, it didn't exist
Yeah.
for him, basically. It was like every failure is gonna push me to try harder so that I win the next time.
Wow.
And so basically, yeah, I don't know, I just find a lot of inspiration from that. I kind of follow in those footsteps
Wow.
based off of kind of what he
That's beautiful.
taught me through it.
It's easier to fail as a team, right?
Yep.
Amen. That's good.
Yeah. Endurance.